So I want to welcome you all here. And first, a few items to go over. First is make sure your cell phones are off, or at least put them on vibrate. The other thing is what we're going to do is I'm going to do a short presentation, and then I'm going to bring the speakers up, and we're going to have primarily a panel discussion. And what I want to invite all of you is to consider some questions, and feel free to interrupt the panel discussion as we go along, because I don't want to wait till the end of the session to ask questions. I want them to come in as we have the discussion ongoing. So, all right. So let's go right into this, because I wanted to get moving forward in our presentation. So, like I said here, we're in the cloud platforms enable distribution in the manufacturing community. But one of the things I want to talk about is where we've been over the last 30, 40 years in terms of digitization. And I've heard this word all this week, all for the last year. But when you look at it, over the last 30 years, we've been doing some form of digitization. And I've looked at this digital divide for probably for quite some time. And that is, we go from the early days when we looked at CAD systems, where a lot of the design was done in an all digital world. And in the manufacturing environment, yes, of course, we had automated machinery, digital controls, but there was no thread between the design and the manufacturing world. But over time, that started to close as we brought more digital information down to the manufacturing floor, and we finally automate some of the setup in the machinery, setup in the manufacturing lines, and ultimately today we're looking at almost digital printing, digital manufacturing through 3D printing that we see today. So, that's somewhat of the ideal case, but there's still a lot more work to do, and that's why a lot of us are here at this forum to talk about how we can make improvements. And that's one of the things I want to point out. And I do a lot of work in the area of covering the machine tool industry, other machinery industries like packaging or metal forming and things of that nature. But here I can point to you I love to look at data to kind of explain a problem or to explain an issue that seems to be out in the world. And so to make it a little bit more concrete. So here I look at the machine tool market, and you're looking at shipments of machine tools over the last, since about 2000. And if you look at really the retention of machine tools in the market, some of these machines last up to 60 years or even longer. I was just working with one of GE's divisions. They have a machine going back to the 1940s that they still want to maintain. But normally, a machine will last between 15 to 25 years. And using that kind of amortization schedule over the period of time, we look at about 3 to 4 million legacy machines that have controls, digital controls going back 15 to 20 years. And we all know how the digital world has changed, so the automation world has changed over that period of time. It's just been tremendous. So what I also want to look at is, what do we produce out of these machines? And we did a little bit of estimation internally. We look at all the varieties of industries that use machine tools, and roughly $453 billion worth of components like camshafts, turbine blades, airline flight wings, et cetera, are all manufactured with machine tools and produce a value of about $453 billion. However, when you look at the cost of running these machines and factor in labor and the valuation of the machine, the productivity ends up the utilization ends up only being around 45%. And in some cases, much less than that. But that's an average, 45% on a huge investment in machinery that has been around for 15 to 20 years. So a lot of companies haven't figured out that they have these hidden assets, don't know how to utilize their assets, and are spending a phenomenal amount of capital resources in equipment that has a much greater potential for utility. So who can solve some of these problems? I mean, of course, we look at some of the machine builders. Can they help the manufacturers or the tool shops or the end users try to resolve their productivity issues? And you look at their challenges. You look at their challenges from a business side. They're on the bottom of the scale in terms of margin growth or overall margins. Their margins are almost virtually pitiful, really. So a lot of these folks don't have the money. A lot of the machine builders don't have the money. They don't have the investment capital to invest in technology to help the end users to improve productivity. They put most of their money in designing higher precision machines, higher performance, mechanical accuracies, but they very rarely focus on the issue of machine productivity. So that is, now what other challenges, how could we solve this problem? It's an integration challenge, and that is an integration challenge for many of the manufacturers who use machines. They've got to think about, how do I connect to machines? How do I get data from machines? And it's basically a connectivity problem. And for the most part, if these turn into engineering projects or large engineering projects, for the most part, they won't get executed. So we have a pretty high hurdle in the industry to really connect machines, because many of them have, you can go through the lack of standardization, whether it's communication interfaces or whether it's data interfaces. There's a whole series of problems that make this into a tremendous engineering challenge. And remember, some of these machines go back 60 years, like I say, and they may use some of the controls going back 30 or 40 years. Well, along comes the internet, or the Internet of Things. We're all talking about it today. Is this something that's going to absolve or remove all of the engineering hurdles that we're talking about? Because we're talking about connecting to physical devices or sensors, making it easier to connect to systems, starting to use this data, aggregating it, analyzing it, and even visualizing, which we've been doing for years. And then also bringing this data to the operators, whether it's mobile interfaces or it's, putting it up into the cloud and doing more big data, providing additional rules for the end user to follow that have developed from these analytics or big data solutions. So is this really the solution? Is this going to resolve all of our productivity problems? Well, we're still working through this. But if you think about the Internet of Things, and I also think it just in the vacuum of improving productivity, you're really taking a narrow view of the industrial IoT. You need to think about it more as an ecosystem. So the benefits that could be achieved improving productivity, going back to that point, is through additional services that are all connected through this vast network of connected machines, production lines, outside provider of services, data services, et cetera. But the whole idea is to think of this particular solution as a connected sphere or a connected ecosystem. And so what do we see today? Well, a lot of machine builders are leveraging the industrial Internet of Things, but for the sole purpose of improving some of their own business performance. As you can see before, that's pretty critical for these machine builders. So they're identifying alternative revenue streams, if you think of services. In fact, one of the companies that I follow had looked at, the publicly held company, they looked at the fact that they don't provide all the services to their machinery because there are a lot of third-party service providers that are tapping into their potential revenue stream. So they looked at that as being competitors to their potential growth. So the services that they want to do is develop services that are fundamentally more attractive to their customers to use than those third-party service providers. Additionally, they want to look at maintenance programs, predictive maintenance particularly, so that they can get in and solve problems well in advance of failures. What does the manufacturer want to do? We've looked at this whole concept of next generation manufacturing. And they want to really improve productivity across the entire sphere of their manufacturing, which means they want to improve the productivity of the people, they want to improve the productivity of the machines, they want to improve the productivity of the overall lines. But this requires really the use of data, large amounts of data, and analyzing it to create information in a fashion that is usable for all those types of different systems. So it's somewhat of a technology problem and also a usability problem. Now, I've looked at some other industries outside of the machine tool industry, and there's actually been a lot of development in creating some sort of ecosystem and connecting the machines. So I look at the mining industry, which is which is served by companies like Komatsu, Caterpillar, and others. And the mining industry is pretty far along the timeline or the development line for connecting systems, putting out their trucks, very large vehicles that are autonomous driving, and connecting these systems to outside data repositories in the cloud to analyze the performance of their equipment and predict failures. I mean, it's even gotten to the point where they actually map out road conditions and feed that into their database to incorporate the fact that they're running over more potholes in the road, causing more mechanical stress and resulting in early failures. So they're doing some very, very interesting things, but these are very closed solutions. These solutions are fundamentally, the problem is you need to use a Caterpillar, you need to use a Komatsu, and there's no ability to create a heterogeneous environment of machinery across different manufacturers. So from the manufacturing side, we need to think about the evolution of a connected machinery or connected enterprise. So what we're looking at today is it's kind of a stepping stone process, and where we basically look at taking machines, creating on-premise data collection repositories that are relatively secure, and may have some localized analytics, localized data data analysis, and then eventually looking at moving that data into a larger repository in the cloud off-site. And this is pretty much an evolutionary process. It's a stepping process for many manufacturers who are very reluctant to really embrace the idea of moving data into the cloud and using outside sources. Because eventually, what we can be looking at is an infrastructure where we start to look at the multi-plant implementations. Data come from multiple plants going into one cloud storage database and starting to analyze performance and identify problem sets across the different operations. And in some cases, people are looking at this as being a possibility to look at industry-wide data. So for example, if the food and beverage manufacturers wanted to start to deposit information into the cloud that they could share in such a way that they could identify best practices. So there's a lot of possibilities here, but like I say, we're really at the very early stages of leveraging this. And the challenge is, who's going to do it? As I mentioned before, the machine builders are interested in their own machines. The manufacturers have a legacy of machines which are on the order, well, if you look across the industry, just in the machine tools alone, millions of machines made by dozens of different manufacturers. All of these are within maybe one plant. Who's going to do this integration to solve the integration problem? That's where we are today. So to improve your business with an industrial IoT architecture, well, you start to look at things like platform for services, which were coming out into the future. And we're looking at machine builders that might have alternative revenue streams, maybe even other parties, the third parties that might look at this as an alternative revenue stream possibilities. Then, of course, the reliability, the predictability, the utilization, all of this comes into play in terms of improvements and benefits, business benefits that will come into play as a result of connecting your enterprise or going through this digitalization process. But in the end, we're still at the very beginning of this whole process, and we look forward to seeing the evolution over the next probably decade.